Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and in a moment, Bin Man and I will be joined by the high-performance manager of the Melbourne Football Club, Selwyn Griffith, to chat about the health and fitness of the Demons. Be sure to subscribe to the Demonland podcast to be notified when a new episode drops. We do a weekly wrap-up of each match, as well as the occasional interview with Demon players and staff, past and present. Check out our recent interview with former Magpie and new Demon recruit Brodie Grundy in our archives. But first, Selwyn Griffith. Our guest tonight is high performance manager of the Melbourne Football Club. Prior to taking the role, he was head of strength and conditioning for the club under Darren Burgess. Before joining the Demons, he held a number of roles at the Brisbane Lions, including as an osteopath and performance coach. As high performance manager of the Demons, he oversees the team's sports science and sports medicine services, ensuring that our players are in peak physical condition every time they take the field. Welcome to the Demonland podcast, Selwyn Griffith.
Thank you very much for having me.
Selwyn, as mentioned in the intro, your background is as an osteopath. How have you utilised those skills in your current role?
Yeah, I think the background of the medical knowledge has been a really sound foundation for my current role, but also previously working in that return to play space. And so it just allows for a really collaborative approach with not only our performance team, but with our medical team to ensure that we're looking at every possible opportunity to take our group forward from a performance element, while understanding that we're in a sport that's high risk, it's combative, it's high intensity, and the training philosophy that we have at the Melbourne Demons is a high intensity, high volume training program as well. So having that understanding allows us to have really collaborative discussions with our medical team around how we're best mitigating against those injuries, but then also with our performance team around how we are building a holistic program to maintain resilience and robustness.
So I'd like to get a bit of behind-the-scenes perspective of the inner workings of a part of a footy club that us as supporters, we really don't get to see, and that's sort of like how the medical and high-performance department, how they work together. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into the managing of, say, an injury? For example, just a grade 1 or 2 hamstring strain, and granted injuries and treatments will differ from injury to injury and player to player. What's the process from the sustaining of the injury, a hammy in this case, to identifying the issue, the rehab program, through to rejoining full training? Can you take us through that process from beginning to end? Who looks after them at each stage? What type of program are they on away from the club? Who oversees them in rehab? And how closely are all the medical staff working to get, the goal or the outcome of them getting back onto the field as quick as possible?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, if an injury is sustained, the primary assessment is from our head physiotherapist, Daniel James, and then depending on which doctor we have there at the time, either Jacob Houston or Laura Lane, they'll be part of that assessment process. And so our first point of call is just the clinical examination. How do they present? What was the mechanism? Obviously every athlete and every injury is different, as you alluded to, and also the mechanism in how the injury occurred. Did it occur during a high-speed running effort? Did it occur as a gradual onset? Was it a sudden onset? What's that athlete's previous experience of injury and or pain, their injury history? And that all then really comes into the initial management of that. So if their clinical presentation is something that is on the milder end, they've got good strength, they've got good range of motion, if we're talking about a muscle injury, as you said, then we definitely are looking at that and assessing the athlete based on their previous history is this something that we require further imaging of to give us a better indication of what the pathology is and what we could possibly be dealing with from a time frame perspective. Or if a lot of those things are really good, so for example, let's say their strength is good, they've lost a little bit of range of motion, they have some awareness, but more they're quite comfortable from a movement perspective, then we may not image and we progress them functionally. And that's probably a big element of our program is the philosophy around how we manage the initial injury and then through the next phases is a lot based on their clinical presentation, their functional capacity, and then setting some really clear objective and subjective markers based off what the research and literature tells us, but then also some of our experience. And we're really fortunate to have some great practitioners in regards to their experience with dealing with a vast majority of injuries. If then we determine that the athlete does need to be modified out of training and they're technically in our reconditioning team, then that's when Jack McLean and Kathleen Fajagan would start to take over their management. And a big philosophy within that component is how can we keep them integrated with the main group while respecting there may be certain elements that they can't complete. Let's, for example, use that hamstring injury. If they're unable to run to high speed yet because they haven't earned the right to do that, can we still get them involved in some handball games and some group warm-up based stuff that may put them at a low risk of possibly re-injuring or re-aggravating that pathology, but keeping them engaged with the group, and we'll keep them integrated in the normal training schedule as well. So attending team meetings, if they've got line meetings, it's really important that one, from an engagement piece, two, from a motivation piece, but three, the other thing, if we've got new players or new roles and team structure, we need to make sure that if they're only out for a short amount of time or a long amount of time, they're able to integrate seamlessly. And that's been a really big focus for us within our reconditioning and return to play, is that no matter if they're out for 1 to 2 weeks or they're out for 6 to 8 weeks, they're AFL ready once they come back. And I think from the last couple of years, we've been able to show that we've got real confidence in our ability to return players at a high level from a conditioning perspective, but also from a skill perspective to allow them to integrate back into AFL standard after missing either short or long periods.
I was gonna ask you this a bit later on, but you sort of touched on it a bit there. In the modern game, is there such a thing as match fitness? Do the modern fitness and conditioning programs negate the need for playing matches before a senior game after after an injury?
Yeah, well, you basically, once again, the amount of time that they miss will dictate a little bit of how much training load and training consistency they miss, because one thing that we know that's really important to mitigate a re-injury or a subsequent injury, let's say someone's done a hamstring and then they come back and they do a calf, is actually training consistency. And that comes in the form of not only just running loads, but it comes in the form of obviously skill-based exposure as well. So we're trying to get players back into those elements as quickly as possible, even if it's at a moderate level, because we know that that's really protective, but it also helps to mitigate losses of aerobic fitness, as you're talking about. And obviously the game of Australian youth football is extremely hard and it's extremely tough to replicate the demands in that. But technology allows us to work back from what the demands of the game are required for different individuals. So that would be in regards to high intensity efforts and in regards to accelerations, decelerations and total volume, time on legs. And so then we can work back from what we know is a normal range for a particular athlete, but we can also work back from what's the worst case scenario. If we were to if we've got data on their previous year or their previous couple of matches, we can get a really great idea of what would be the worst case scenario for them in a 5-minute period or a 10-minute period or across a quarter. And that's where our sports scientist, Nick Murray, is fantastic in that space. And he did his PhD in regards to training load and its impact on injury and athlete wellness. So we're able to then put that sort of information into our return to play programs to ensure that if an athlete doesn't have the ability to, say, come back through the VFL, we're still exposing them to those workloads in a constrained environment from a return to play and reconditioning perspective. So, yeah, it is one of those tricky constraints because obviously we want our list to be healthy. So if we're healthy and we're building robust and resilient athletes, you may only have 2 or 3 guys in a reconditioning and return to play program, which means trying to build out a 12 to 14K session with only 2 or 3 athletes. One, can be challenging from a motivational perspective for the athlete, but 2, recreating the cognitive demands and the mechanical demands are quite tricky as well. So we've constantly evolving that and refining it and building it out. But I think we have a nice framework that we have had over the last couple of years that we're continuing to evolve.
Thanks, Sue. And just apologies if my dog starts barking. He's been suspiciously quiet, and he almost certainly will start barking now that I'm talking on Zoom. You sort of touched on this a little bit, but Tom McDonald did a podcast interview in January, and he talked about how much footy had changed in his time in terms of the aerobic demands on all players, and he was talking about himself in the context of needing to come off the ground and have the break to be able to run at intensity. And noting that how much high-speed repeat running is required, something I'm guessing will only increase this season with the move, the shift, it seems, from many teams to a faster ball movement and more transition from the back half. In your time in footy, how much have the aerobic demands of AFL footy changed?
Yeah, I think the aerobic demands have always been there of the game. What you're finding now is with the constraints of the rotations and then, as you just alluded to, the speed in which some teams are moving and even to a degree what we've seen with a decrease in some stoppages, you're seeing the ball transition back and forth, which means that that's requiring players to be exposed to repeat high speed efforts with minimal rest, and the aerobic fitness element is basically that system that you require to recover from those efforts and then be able to repeat them at the same intensity for long duration. So if your aerobic capacity is poor, you'll be able to sustain those efforts for a short period or for the first quarter, but as the duration of the game continues, that's when you're going to have that inability to maintain that intensity throughout 4 quarters of football. And that's the unique element of Australian football in how long it goes for and the difference in quarter length depending on goals, stoppages and those sorts of things is quarters can go from anywhere from 26 to 38 minutes, but rotations stay at 75 for the game. And so you need to be able to manipulate that based on every athlete has a different physical profile. You have guys who are pure speed athletes and aerobically they aren't as robust as some athletes. Some athletes have a beauty of both, which Alex Neil-Bullen is one of those for us, and then other athletes are really highly aerobic and then lack some of the speed qualities. So that's the unique element of an AFL list, in that you'll have a mixture of those sorts of players, and probably the uniqueness that Tom touched on is now you have lots of athletes who play different positions within the same game as well. So the requirements for them to play in different positions are different, depending if they're playing as a speed forward or a wingman or an inside mid. And so your ability to then manipulate within game around those athletes you need to be really fluid and agile with that.
Just with the players like Nibbler and I guess Spargo and Hunter and Langdon, those type of athletes, what would be the equivalent in another sport? You say athletics, what would be the equivalent type of athlete?
We have probably similar profiles to 800-metre athletes. So if you look at the speed profiles, the maximal velocities that our AFL athletes can run, and then the aerobic demands, it's probably similar to an 800-metre athlete. Probably the one difference is obviously the contact element and the muscle mass that a lot of our guys retain in order to play the game that we play. So that's one of the constrictors in probably allowing them to reach the elite levels of aerobic fitness that you see in 800 metre athletes. But yeah, when you look at the profiles, definitely a lot of similarities to those sorts of athletes.
I went to the practice game at St Kilda, and up close on the interchange fence, it was remarkable how little fat the players, particularly those sorts of running players, carrying, and that they do look like 800 metre runners to the eye. So, in terms of the need to have a premiership contending team, so like a team with a genuine, internally they think they're a genuine shot at winning the flag. In terms of having such a team in optimal shape fitness-wise come grand final time, what does the training program look like over, say, the January to end of December, so like a 12-month period?
Yeah, well, obviously our pre-season period is a big component for us to build our aerobic foundation and our consistency of high speed and high tolerance. Now, the difference between pre-season and then once we transition into February, March, is they're not having to recover from the contact elements of the game and the unpredictable. Like, we're still obviously doing some forms of match simulation and contest in training, but the transition from that into in-season, you're pretty much getting 70% of your overall load in-season from the game. And then the rest of that is made up of your training in the week. The one constraint that is tricky since COVID is our game turnarounds, and this year it's better because we get the first 15 rounds really clearly identified, and so you're able to look at when we have our shorter turnarounds and longer turnarounds. But the last couple of years where the AFL has held off the schedule, you are really you struggle to plan forward what the ideal training structure is, because you do need to respect the accumulation of fatigue based on turnarounds, travel, these sorts of things, to highlight the fact that after Sunday's game, we go into a 7-day turnaround. We travel to Perth, and we are on a 6-day turnaround into Gather Round in Adelaide with a back-to-back travel. So those sorts of things constrain how much training you can do, and those are the main manipulations that happen between now and September. You have to look at certain times where you can increase some of that training stimulus, because obviously with such a long season, as I mentioned before, with your aerobic fitness being such an important element, the game doesn't actually train your aerobic fitness system because it is so variable for different individuals. So you need to look for periods within the season that you can get some pure aerobic conditioning into the group to maintain, or just even to try to still elevate that capacity for some individuals throughout a season. And that's the unique balance within a year when you only have one mid-year buy and one end-of-season buy if you're coming into September. So, yeah, it definitely probably one element is looking at how we're rotating players both in-game and then throughout the season, being cognizant of our playing list and how we can continue to manage their fitness and fatigue across the year. And with the addition of an extra season, an extra game, that's something that we've definitely discussed internally. But, with only being 2 rounds down, you're having those conversations about just being mindful of it. But obviously only 2 rounds in, we haven't accumulated a huge amount of fatigue just yet. It's more as we progress through the season.
That sort of actually leads perfectly into the next question. Just from watching the footage, the training footage and reading the reports, the training reports, and what the players talk about, that January and February is a really, a heavy loading phase for the players that, as you said, sets them up 70% of their load for the year. Does the team do another loading phase during the season? And if so, when and how long is that block of training?
Yeah, we're looking at that at the moment, and that's where the mid-year period and the bye, you look for those periods, or you look in and around periods where you have 9 or 10 day breaks. But once again, that's all dictated to you by what you've done in the preceding 2 weeks because, as I mentioned before, you need training consistency. So if we've gone off the back of, for example, a 6 and a 5 day turnaround, you can guarantee that in those 2 weeks we've had a reduction in training volume because we just haven't been able to train too much. So then if we add a substantial amount of volume the following week, that may have some benefit on a fitness element, but does it also possibly put an injury risk element within that because of the lack of consistency? And that's the battle this year. Unfortunately, don't really get a true buy. If you guys have looked at the schedule, we pretty much get 3, 9 or 10 day turnarounds. So we play 4 games in 5 weeks in that mid-year period. So that's where we're currently planning around where we can get an increased exposure in some of our aerobic capacity development, but also respecting that throughout that period between rounds 12 and 15 or 16, it's probably a period where the boys are also feeling physically and mentally fatigued. So we've also got to understand that the game can be quite hard, both mentally and physically, and so there's a balance of offering the playing group some recovery from that perspective as well, and that's that balance of finding the balance of pushing hard enough to continue to develop their capacity while respecting that there may be a period that we need to also step it back.
Selwyn, you don't need to get into too many specifics, especially if there's an IP component, but can you run us through what a typical week's worth of load looks like in the pre-season in terms of kilometres run, and then perhaps explain to our audience the science behind why after playing the practice match where we played 4 25-minute quarters, we then proceeded to go across the road and run in 30-plus degree heat for 30 minutes?
Yeah, well, I can touch on the St Kilda game. Yeah, we had kept that week similar to a pre-season structure, and because pre-season is shorter than what it has previously been, and we know that consistency of exposure to high intensity and high volume can be really beneficial for developing road capacity, but also developing robustness and resilience. We saw that as a really important time for us to continue to build that, knowing that then over the next month that was going to gradually reduce as we came into the season. And so the St Kilda game offered us an opportunity because also the game was constrained, so it was only 25 minutes. So naturally we knew that our guys wouldn't get a normal AFL game exposure. And so we had guys that were only really 60 to 70% of what they would typically get out of a game. And so that built the foundation of where we wanted to build them to for the end of that, so that we could take that into the in-season period and prepare them, because the last thing we want is to under-prepare them and then going into round one and seeing lots of guys cramp because you've had this reduction in training intensity and training volume from the previous couple of weeks. So that was a little bit of the reasoning behind that, and it did give us a really good transition into our in-season model. As we transition into an in-season model with a 7-day break, if we were to play Saturday to Saturday, the players would typically get a Sunday off, and then Monday becomes a fundamentals training session, and that's where we're looking at the recovery aspect from the game, how players have responded. So they would fill out a questionnaire, and we have a few other objective and subjective measures that we use in collaboration with the match data to make decisions around what players' training involvement would be on that Monday, where it's a skill-based session, predominantly focused on getting the footy back in the hands and less around high-intensity, high-interval work. And then the following day, the Tuesday, we have a lot of meetings and some breakdown aspect, as well as some of our gym-based work. And then our Wednesday would be our main training session, where we're getting the majority of our high-intensity and high-volume exposure within our drill selection, as well as having some specific conditioning elements or speed exposure elements to certain players depending on what they got out of the game, because it's so variable. Also, the variation between AFL exposure versus VFL exposure, and continuing to best prepare our players who have played in VFL to AFL intensity, because there is a little bit of a difference between the two levels. And then they would go into a day off, and then we have our captain's run, which is focused around setting up for the game on the following Saturday. So that's the breakdown of a normal week.
Thanks, Selwyn. Personally, I'm increasingly of the view that in AFL footy now, talent, and development in the list, and where the list is at demographically and all of those things, and luck with injury, that fitness level is now one of the top three determinants of a team's ability to go all the way and win a flag. Do you think that's a reasonable assessment?
I think talent is probably number one. I think, your ability to have a resilient and robust list becomes the other element of that, and aerobic fitness and strength become the two key elements of that. So I think, fitness definitely. It probably also relies pretty heavily on what your game plan is and your game structure. And so our physical performance program is built off the foundation of how good he wants to play and how our football program wants to play. So if our game style was to change, our approach to conditioning and strengthening from a gym-based perspective would likely change or have to adapt as well. So the fitness elements, I think, will differ club to club based on the game style and the game plan. And that's, I think, been one of the things that has been a strength of ours, definitely, at the Demons over the last 3 years, is just that alignment across both our football performance program and our physical conditioning program.
And just on the tweaks to our game plan this year seem to be the talk coming from the club was that we're going to be moving the ball a bit more quickly from the back half and, using kicks to the corridor a bit more often. And does that mean that you've had to readjust your program, and what's been the impact of that? What I would think is more of a tweak than a wholesale change, but what's been the impact of that shift?
It probably just heightens the importance around the element of making sure our guys can sustain repeat high intensity efforts for the duration of the game. I wouldn't have said too much around the foundational aspects adjusted, but it was definitely heightening the elements around how can we continue to make sure that our players can reach those speeds and reach them consistently and frequently throughout the duration of the game.
So when you touched on the back-to-back travel in weeks 4 and 5, how big an impact is, say, a 6 or even a 5-day breaks between matches? And I bring that up because we also have a 5-day break coming up after Anzac Eve from round 6 to round 7. So how do you adjust to that scheduling?
Yeah, every athlete adjusts differently to travel and to the demands of the game. So there is an individual approach to it, but obviously in those shorter periods, you have to heighten the importance of the recovery strategies in those initial 24, 48 hours, because you're asking the group to go back into high intensity efforts 1 or 2 days earlier than what they typically would on a 7 or an 8 day turnaround. So we just work with the athletes on educating them that if these are some of the symptoms and the signs that you're feeling, then these are the best strategies to improve your recovery and best prepare you for the next training session, because it's really important that we reintroduce the skill-based work and the speed-based work within the training week to then prepare them for the demands of the game on the weekend. Obviously, on a 5-day turnaround, that's kind of your biggest constraint, is you are having to just reduce volume and intensity game to game, and almost just need to respect the fact that the game is really hard, and they've got substantially less time to recover from it. So if you go adding load upon an already fatigued athlete, that's where you can either increase their risk of injury or just underprepare them for the next game. So that's a real balance, and we just take that on an individualised approach while having some group-based protocols as well that we know, sleep, nutrition, and hydration are foundational elements of recovery that everybody needs, and then the other aspects of that can be somewhat individualised depending on what an athlete feels best helps them, whether that be ice baths or saunas or compression, massage, breath work and mindfulness meditation and those sorts of things. They're all strategies that different individuals may use to help facilitate their recovery.
Well, that sort of leads into our next couple of questions, and that's all. And we've only got a couple more to go, and we thank you for your time. I'd like to get your thoughts on nutrition. There have been a number of different diets with players over the years. How does it affect someone like Big Benny Brown, who's a celiac, is a vegan, eats gluten-free, and that's him on one end of the scale, and then there's T-Mac, who eats a whole beast every week at the other end. How closely are you monitoring the diets as part of the player's performance on the track?
The boys, they work really closely with Lisa Milton, our performance dietitian, and she's fantastic in regards to the individual approach. And, from a Ben Brown, it's really making sure that he gets enough calorie-dense meals in to sustain the requirements of his game, because he does run a lot, and then there's high demands for him within the role that he plays. And then, with Tommy McDonald, it's working with him as well to make sure that, protein is one of the important foundations for him. But, because of also the type of athlete he is, where he is quite a dynamic power forward, there's also a big requirement for carbohydrates and glycogen for him. So they work really well with Lisa, and then we kind of build out some frameworks and guidelines in regards to what they should be fueling leading into main training sessions or games, but then also on the days where we're not doing much, offering them a little bit of freedom in regards to how they manipulate their diet to accommodate those days, because there is the ability to manipulate throughout the week, because your demands adjust across the week, where we can have low volume and low requirement days versus some high requirement days in regards to our main training. And then, it's also working on the individual needs of, do they need to add muscle mass? Do they need to adjust their body composition? And what does that look like from a structure throughout the day, or around their main training sessions, whether that be gym-based or field-based. Yeah, so we definitely, it's one of the cornerstones, and over the last couple of years, the support from Richo in regards to how we best offer those services for the players has been phenomenal. And so it has been something that we've invested in from a football club perspective, and Lisa has been driving that with the playing group, so it's been fantastic.
In terms of mental aspects of the game, you're obviously working with players that might need help with aspects of the game from a psychological perspective, whether, as you mentioned, it's about players might be having trouble sleeping, which can affect them on match day, or perhaps something like, for want of a more PC term, someone who's got maybe the yips in front of goal. So how does that all work with sort of helping players from a psychological point of view?
Yeah, so part of our welfare team, where we've got a performance psychologist in Steve Rendell, who works really closely with the playing group on elements of that. And then as part of the holistic program, there's been a real emphasis put on the mindset aspect of how we're approaching every day and building purpose around every day. And so that's intertwined within every aspect of our program. And I think that's why it's been such a powerful part of our program across the pre-season and as it's transitioned into the in-season, because it's been embedded in what we do on the field. It's been embedded in what we do in meetings. It's been embedded in what we do within the gym. And so the playing group have really bought into better understanding how we can continue to be better as individuals and how that influences the people around us, but also how they can continue to build purpose within their individual program and own the development of their individual program, because we also know that it is very much individualised in regards to that sort of approach. And so for some people, something like visual imagery may be quite beneficial when you're talking about the goal kicking aspect, but for other people, it may be as simple as some breath work or some grounding. And so that's where Steve and the coaches really come together to build that out with the athlete and have them really involved in that aspect of their program development. And then it's just something about consistency. It's about building a habit with it, and we know that can take at least 28 days to build that habit and build that routine. And it doesn't always give you positive outcomes, but it's about being process driven in regards to each of those aspects. And if we can come back to being process driven and evaluating it based on that rather than just the outcome, then that's when we'll start to get our playing group better understanding how they can best prepare themselves both mentally and physically.
Just on the psychology, so in terms of I'm just wondering the sort of impact sometimes of psychology on performance, on match day performance. It seemed to me that, quite with no surprise, the team were in a bit of shock when Maxi went down, and I saw Jack Viney get interviewed at half time as he's walking off, and he looked as white as a ghost, the poor fella. And in terms of that sort of incident, and given the potential impact on the team psychologically, I also looked at the tracking data between the first round and the second round, and a lot of our numbers in terms of distance run were well down. Like Nibbler, for instance, was over a kilometre down on what he put out in round one. Is there a link? Is there a link between something like that from a psychological perspective and then ability to, I guess, deliver the physical stuff, the running and that's required?
Yeah, I think it would be negligent for me to think that there isn't. It's hard to draw a clear line, but what we do know from our playing group is the care and the love they have for each other is something that I've never seen within a football organisation before. So for our players to see their captain go down with that within the first 5 minutes of the game, I've no doubt that would have had an impact on their ability to stay in the moment. Whether that then has an impact on the physiological outputs, I think for some individuals that's probably true or possibly true, but also in regards to how dominant Brisbane were in that first half, that constrains what some of our players are able to do as well. So there was probably a bit of a double-edged sword there, but then also how it impacts you structurally in regards to the requirements that Brodie had put on him, which he hadn't really had to deal with over his prior 3 games. So that was something unique for him to deal with, and then what that changes structurally, which can have unfortunately a negative impact on possibly how our players can run from that perspective. So I think definitely whenever you have something like that, especially to someone like Max, and a bit of the uncertainty around what the diagnosis was going to be, the players are going to be affected by that, and that is a great opportunity for us to learn from that and to grow, because unfortunately injuries will continue to occur across the season, and there's a big element of luck associated to that. And so we're not going to be immune to another injury in game, and if our players can reset a little bit quicker and be able to ensure that we're performing our role, then hopefully, we're able to deal with those instances and not have it impact on our physiological outputs or our ability to perform our role.
While we're talking about Big Maxi, are you able to give us a bit of an update on how he is and what the time frame is likely to be?
Back in 2 weeks.
Well, yeah, obviously, it was great news that there was no ACL damage. But yeah, he's working back from the MCL strain. He's progressed really well in these initial couple of days. But we still have to respect the pathology and the healing time with that. So he's got a few markers that he's got to tick off towards the end of this week to earn the right to get back to running, and then from there, it'll be that progression through agility and his ruck-specific skills to earn the right to get back. So we're hoping that he's back around the 4 to 6 week mark. But this next probably 2 to 3 weeks will give us real clarity on what that looks like for him. And the one thing we know about Max is he loves to work and he pushes himself hard, and that's been a foundation for him probably for the majority of his career. And so I'm really confident that we can get Max in peak physical shape to continue to dominate for the rest of the season. So that's where we're looking at this next 4 weeks of how we can continue to set him up for success for the rest of the year.
I'm sure everyone at the club shared the D's fans' response and relief on Saturday when it came back cleared, because it felt like a win almost, despite the fact that we lost, obviously. But that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right. So he's obviously progressed well.
Sorry, so last one from me. I'm just sort of reflecting on your role, and I guess in many ways it's like the sort of peak of in performance management at AFL level, like to be in your role at AFL, but it must be a tough gig in some ways. It feels to me it's a bit like the umpires. When things are going well or really well, no one gives you any attention or focus, and no one says we're going well because how well the high performance team is going. But if there are any issues, 1 or 2 soft tissue injuries, we struggle a bit in games, people are pretty quick to point fingers these days at the high performance team. How do you go with that aspect of the job?
Yeah, it's a unique industry that we work in, because every 7 days is pretty much on review. And so if you work in the corporate world or in business, you might have quarterly reviews where you're looking at your budgets and you've got another quarter to make it up. But every 7 days, we're constantly reviewing, refining and learning more about ourselves. And I love what I do, and I'm really fortunate that I've got Goody and Richo around to support me, but also our performance and medical team are easily the best in the industry, so they make my job easy as well. And I'm really confident that because of how closely we work as a physical performance department with our football performance department, and we're intertwined, that we're developing resilient and robust athletes to play the Melbourne Demons way. So I'm really confident in that, and that gives me confidence in regards to how we go into games and how we progress throughout the season, to know that, we're really aligned in that view across all elements of the program. So while you never want injuries to occur, and we would like to go undefeated, unfortunately it's a tough competition and luck plays a big role. But the support and the care that we have internally, both from staff and players, just makes my job really easy and ensures that we're constantly looking for ways to get better and just learning from each opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Selwyn. We really do appreciate it. It's been a very illuminating conversation on an aspect of the club that we as supporters only get a glimpse of, but it does form a massive part of what we see on field come game day. So thank you once again, Selwyn Griffith.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I really appreciate just the opportunity to highlight part of our program.
That was Selwyn Griffith, the high performance manager of the Melbourne Football Club. Join us every Monday night live on demonland.com at 8:30 p.m. as we dissect the latest Demons match. If you can't join us live, a new episode drops every Tuesday morning, and you can also check out our growing number of interviews with players past and present in our archives. Go Demons!
Come on, Demons. Come on, demons.